707. I'm Daedalus Howell. We have Chris Rogers with us. He's running for City Council, but you may know him in the local arena here as a policy advisor for a local green energy company. He's also part of the Community Advisory Board for which district are we talking about again?
For the entire city of Santa Rosa, actually.
The entire city. All right.
All 172,000 people.
Oh my God, really?
Yep.
Why the impetus to run for City Council? When I've spoken to other people also running, the answers, of course, run the gamut, but they come down to notions of service and all that. Is that it?
It really is, and I think that it actually has to be. In my particular case, I was born in Santa Rosa,
Yeah.
and for the last decade, I've had an opportunity to help represent our incredible community. I have worked for a Congresswoman, I have worked for members of the State Assembly and State Senate as staff, intimately involved not only at the local level meeting people, but also working on important policy for the area. And I think what happens is you get a little bit involved and you start to see need.
Right.
And you start to understand everybody's role in lifting everybody in your community up. That's my background, is I actually come from a family a nonprofit family. My mom works with developmentally delayed children under the age of 5.
Wow.
The expectation for me growing up was always that I would work hard and that I would contribute and I would try to make the community a better place for everybody, particularly that particular population. And I don't know that you can be involved, particularly right now, and not see the need. And so after talking it over with a number of people, thought that I could contribute to the city. It's where I was born. It's where I want to raise a family. And so just creating the community that I want to see.
When you do seek advice in this particular realm, who do you seek out to get that advice? Who do you trust to say, should I run? How do you know it's just not some whack job saying, dude, yeah, totally, you should totally run? You know, I mean, like,
I mean, the first thing that you really need to do is you need to talk with your friends and with your family and make sure that they're going to be there with you.
Because you're going to become a public person if you aren't already, and by dint of that, they might as well too.
Right.
Or they may as well.
I will also tell you, I was warned right off the bat that when you make the transition from working behind the scenes to being a public official, you become the public piñata, and everybody has a stick. And I was just reminded over and over again from people that at least you get candy if you get whacked. So the goal is to try to get the policy out of the piñata on that front and be willing to lead with core values and lead with integrity and hope that the community sees that and doesn't hit you too hard.
Yeah, no, that's a great metaphor. I'm going to use that. But maybe I'm just missing something in my DNA. Maybe I don't have that service gene, or maybe I'm just a selfish jerk. I'm puzzling through that. I'm trying to give back in this case, working with this nonprofit. But I find my ego gets in the way too much when it comes to stepping out in front of the population. How do you defray your ego from getting in the way of service? Because you're going to be on posters, you're going to be on TV, you're going to be everywhere. How do you not turn into Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, I don't know how anybody becomes Donald Trump.
Right. You have better hair. I think that's where it starts. Yeah.
Give me some time here.
That's not an easy win, or a hard win. Yeah, really.
I do think that having a good understanding of the history of where you're coming from, and I use this example all the time, that we have had some pretty incredible state senators and state assembly members who have represented our community. And the window of people remembering who they are, remembering their name, is actually relatively short.
Right.
So if you're in it to have your name known, if you're in it because you want the notoriety, you're in it for the wrong reasons. If you're there to help make a difference in somebody's life, the people who remember their elected officials are the ones that reached out and they needed help finding housing, and their elected officials helped them find housing, or they were having an issue with the DMV and they called up their state senator and they took care of it. It's those personal touches that have made somebody's life better, not showing up and doing a ribbon cutting or showing up and having your picture taken. That's not what service is about. It's about making your community better, and those things are still important to be seen and to have people understand that you're a resource there for them. But what really makes the community a better place is when the elected official is working with the community to actually advance everybody.
You totally nailed it there, because I can't tell you who our last state senator was. And I should be, I'm a journalist, I should know that, right? I just can't. So you're saying this is not a stab, if you want celebrity, this is not, you're going to end up on a plaque, maybe. Right? Okay. But what you can do in this case, especially starting with City Council, is begin a political career. Is that something that you've been mulling?
So I've actually, because I've worked behind the scenes.
Yeah, you've had a political career.
I've lived the life of an assembly member,
Yeah.
going back and forth between Sonoma County and the Capitol.
Who have you worked with, by the way?
So I actually started with Congresswoman Woolsey back when I was 18.
Wow.
It was the first time I did my first internship with her.
Petaluma, yeah.
Yeah, and when I went off to college, worked as a fellow in the state capitol, giving up one of my last quarters to represent UC Santa Barbara, go Gauchos, in the legislature.
Yeah.
And fell into a job actually back with the Congresswoman afterwards. It was the middle of the recession. And I actually came from a journalism background. And it was just very interesting to how that kind of came about.
Well, tell me about journalism, because it has fundamentally changed as a,
Yes.
as a career, right? What was your interest in, and how did you go from there to, the world of politics?
Well, I'll actually tell you where it dovetails very nicely for me is I worked my way up on the school paper in high school, was the editor-in-chief and got to write opinion. And going off to college and working on journalism where you're back at the bottom of the totem pole and having to cover everything completely factually and not able to say this is wrong,
right.
or calling people out if they're doing things that are harmful to their community.
But that's a serious paper. That's one of the best ones in the nation for college papers.
Right,
Yeah.
and so you have to work really hard to get back to the opinion section. I liked giving people my opinion on a situation a little bit better than just covering it for the newspaper, and so that's how I made the switch to political science, actually.
You actually changed your major.
So I actually started as a dual major between linguistics and political science.
Wow.
And there's something very powerful, I think, in looking at legislation as sort of a puzzle and figuring out how can you use words to make people's lives better? How can you use words to change the meaning of something or to advance a policy? So it's always been a particular interest of mine. So I went off and I worked for the legislature, actually for Pat Wiggins at the time, learning the legislative process, learning the ins and outs of changing shalls to mays and how that all affects all of us. Really interesting things on the life of a party.
But that stuff is fascinating,
right.
At least to me, in another writer. But you said something interesting, using words for the sake of service and making people's lives better versus the nuance of what amounts to legalese, right? How is it you're always able to put the people first?
Well, that's what I actually found when I was in the Capitol, is I was having a hard time, even though I was representing my community and I was representing where I was from, it was really difficult to be in the Capitol all the time. And this goes back to your original question. I enjoyed coming back and spending Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday in the community, working with the people that I was trying to make their lives better, that was out of their peripheral Monday through Thursday over in Sacramento.
Right.
And so when you ask about a future political career, I've actually worked it backwards. I started at Congress as an aide where you couldn't get anything done, at the state legislature, which still felt very divorced from the work that you've done. And so I got involved at the local level. I've now served on 8 different boards or commissions. You mentioned the Santa Rosa Community Advisory Board,
right.
As well as the Violence Prevention Partnership, working on gang prevention issues, and the Area Agency on Aging, helping seniors stay in their home. It's about the people and working directly with them. And so for me, I've worked my way backwards. I would love to serve on the city council here and represent my community.
And then after city council, though, I know I'm baiting you, but
right.
Supervisor.
So I know you can't tell from the gray hairs, but I'm actually kind of a young guy. It might be nice to settle down and start a family and do some of that in this community. That's not on the radar.
I hear you. We're talking with Chris Rogers. He's running for city council. We'll be right back on 7 to 7:07. I'm Daedalus Howell. We're back talking with Chris Rogers. He's running for city council, and when you're running for city council, your family and friends are also running for city council in part. Let's talk a little bit about them and growing up in Santa Rosa and what that was like. Child of the 90s, thereabouts? 80s,
Yeah,
90s?
so late 80s.
Yeah.
And actually, my family, like many families right now, were priced out of Santa Rosa. So I was born here.
All right.
And spent most of my childhood in Roanoke Park. Almost every school that I went to was along Snyder Avenue.
Wow.
And fun fact, came back, hit SSU for grad school on the back end, so still hit SSU too.
You have the cyclical nature to your life and career, it seems like.
Yes. It's funny how that happens.
Yeah.
But my family's still in the area. My dad remarried, still lives in Roanoke Park. My mom remarried, lives in Windsor. And my little brother, actually it's his birthday today,
Oh, right on.
just got engaged, lives
Wow.
in Roanoke Park as well. Older brother lives across the country and avoids a whole lot of this.
Well, for the one that's still here, the one sticking it out.
Yes.
Happy birthday and congrats on the engagement. Awesome.
Yeah, it's been a good year for him.
Yeah, yeah. Could be even better.
Yep.
Right? My brother's in the city council. Right.
Well, he's the personable one. He actually does acting.
Oh.
So he's been in a couple of commercials and tried to make his mark there. So
Nice.
really good guy.
Oh, that's great. Your mom worked with the developmentally challenged, and what did your dad do?
So my dad works for Coca-Cola.
Okay, right.
So anybody who knows me knows that I am a huge Diet Coke addict, and I blame him for that.
Nice.
Yes.
And so they're obviously supporting your bid for city council, right? What do you perceive any sort of fallout from that? Like, are they going to get the lens of Kevin McCallum on them from the Press Democrat, or?
Yeah, I don't think so. But I will tell you, working for the legislature, every time the budget came out, I'd miraculously get a dinner invitation from my mom, who would want to complain about the funding for developmental services at the state level. Obviously, not much I could do, but I think the political fallout has always been more about the expectations being put on you, particularly in our district. One thing that isn't really talked a whole lot about in Santa Rosa is the effects that the closure of the developmental center out in Sonoma Valley is going to have on our community. It's 400 of the state's most needy residents, and coming from the background that I come from, working with developmentally delayed children and growing up working with them, my mom always said to me, don't let them fail. Don't put them in the community without the resources that they need. They'll end up on the streets or in jails. And I agree with her. But every time the budget came out, she'd want to talk a little bit about it. So I think it's more on that end, not on, they can handle themselves.
So, and I know the Sonoma Development Center is not in your jurisdiction, so to speak, but it is sort of a bellwether for how those services are going to be mitigated or dealt with throughout the county and in Santa Rosa. If you could change something in Santa Rosa right now, like just magic wand kind of style, in terms of dealing with that population, what would you do?
Well, the hard part right now is the state has actually systematically closed down developmental centers, and they're treating SDC as though it's one of those centers. When what has actually happened is they've moved the neediest around the state into one location. So that population is particularly vulnerable, and the governor himself in his task force report identified that many of them will not make it in community placement. So from our standpoint, if the state is intent on closing the developmental centers, and there are parallels between what Reagan did back in his heyday and what the governor is doing now, if they do not develop the services, and that requires money and it requires housing here in Sonoma County, the residents are either going to leave or they're going to end up costing us more money in terms of trying to get them off the streets, and
just triaging
or worst case scenario is that they just won't make it, and that to me is criminal. I think government should always be judged based on how it treats its most vulnerable communities, and if you're not willing to take care of that population, I think it reflects very poorly on our community and on our state.
I think it's a really great way to look at it. It's a great way to frame it. It brings to mind the issue with the homeless we have here in Santa Rosa, which has become more apparent due to various displacement scenarios that have occurred, right? I think the rubric you just established there stands as strongly for them as well. They're a vulnerable part of our population for a variety of reasons. What can we do?
Yeah. So I will tell you, with my community advisory board background, one of the things I'm big on in my campaign is holding neighborhood coffees, where a neighbor will host and will invite everybody around them to come have a conversation about the issues that affect their particular neighborhood. We get to talk a lot about broad city issues, but everybody cares about which pothole they want fixed in their neighborhood, right?
Right.
The number one issue that is brought up over and over again is homelessness. First question across the board, across the city. And
homelessness, like not in my backyard, or homelessness?
It's interesting because the way that it's brought up is people say, I feel so bad, we need to help these people, but without sounding like they don't have any compassion, but these are the effects it's having on my neighborhood, leaving needles in their yard, cars being rattled through. The reality is not everybody who is homeless wants to be off the street.
Yeah, I've talked about this before with other people, and a lot of it comes down to personal freedom. To be in a program, you have to be with the program and abide by their rules, and your freedoms are changed to that point. And
many worry if they have a dog right now for safety on the street, that they might not be able to keep their dog. I get that. The reality is, many people don't want to be there. If they want to be there, fine. That's their right, their freedoms. Let's talk about how we mitigate any of the other concerns. But many of the individuals who are on the street have some form of a physical or mental disability where they need help breaking that poverty cycle. And if we can get them into housing, and housing is very cost prohibitive in Sonoma County, and get services around them, really difficult to deliver services to somebody if you can't find them or if they're mobile,
Right.
or transient. And we do a really good job of that. We need to provide those services, make sure that we're tailoring them the best way possible. And I know Catholic Charities in particular knows the population very well and knows which individuals need the most help. But I'll give you a story, actually. When I was working for Senator McGuire, we were helping a homeless individual who can't give you her whole history, but she had been through some tragedies early in her life, and she was an alcoholic. And we would fight really hard to get her into services, and she'd get there, and she'd fail, and she'd fall out of the services. Mm-hmm. And then we'd try to get her into new services. And because she didn't have the full level of support, it was very difficult to actually personalize the services to her. I'm happy to report, last I heard, she is doing well, that she's in services and she's been in for a couple of months, and I hope that sticks. But it's a process. It's really difficult for people to break that cycle, particularly if that's all they've known. And in her case, it'd been since she was about 13, and now she's, I think, in her 50s.
Wow.
So it'd been a long time.
Where do we find the money for this? Where does Santa Rosa have the money for this, besides sitting on the MyPeg fees? Where is the dough to enable these kind of services?
The reality is you can effectively end homelessness for those who don't want it if you have political will and if you have money. Right now in our community, we have a lot of political will, and it's really nice to see. Love the Palms Inn project as sort of a model of things that we can do if we think outside the box. But the reality is that homelessness is a state problem. Santa Rosa does have a homeless population 3 times a city of its size for the national average. We've seen that in our region.
Wow.
Yep.
Into that. Wow.
Last year, we pulled together a summit with leaders up and down the North Coast to talk about what services were actually out there and what services were we crossing over with. There is a myth out there that the services being provided causes the homeless to come to your region. That's actually not true. That's not what we see in the data.
The idea that because we're a county seat, Santa Rosa attracts homeless because we are liberal services.
Correct.
Not true. Okay.
So the most recent homeless count showed that over 85% of the homeless that they counted had lived in Sonoma County for 10 years. That's our people.
This is their home.
That's our problem. For me, the most egregious, what we saw was 800 SRJC students who don't have stable housing. That every night they go to bed either in their cars or on the streets or on a friend's couch. And that number is going to go up with the Clayton fire and with the Valley fire from last year. People who were traveling down to go to the JC who had homes in Lake County that because they could live there, they lost their homes. I was always raised to believe that if you work hard, get an education, learn a trade, you should be able to lift yourself up from poverty. And we have a significant chunk of our homeless population is trying to do that, and they're not able to right now.
Wow, we should come back to that in a second. It's 7:07. We're talking with Chris Rogers, running for City Council. We'll be right back. It's 7:07. I'm Daedalus Howell. We're back with Chris Rogers. We're talking about running for City Council, and one of the issues we landed on in this process is that of homelessness. And you brought up some really striking figures about the amount of homeless currently enrolled at the JC and having to live where they can, how they can, and how that sort of reconfigures how we look at the American dream and the idea that you can bootstrap yourself into something by going to school, by getting a trade. That has broken down. And you seem very interested in the sort of the micro and macro relationship of granular government, neighborhood to neighborhood to area to city. How do you apply that approach to fixing this particular problem? And I know I'm asking a lot of you, but door to door, how can we help you help them?
So I think the number one thing that we can do as a community, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yes, because that was phrased horribly.
is to continue to give people the tools that they need. to be able to build a better life for themselves and for their family. We talked a little bit about entrepreneurship and business, and I will be the first to tell you I'm working for a business for the first time in my life. It's a whole different set of skills than it was
working in government. Yeah.
Yep, working for government or working for a nonprofit, which is good. Good for people to know that. I would not have been as successful right off the bat if I didn't have people who were willing to mentor or give me advice, the pitfalls particularly that they had hit. I think that there's a lot of capacity in our community. I think if we give people the tools that they need to be able to thrive, I think they will. I really want Santa Rosa to be a place where if you have a good idea, you can start a small business and you can build that life for you and your family. It shouldn't be rocket science for you to start a small business.
Unless it's rocket science.
Unless it's rocket science. And then hey, bring that to Santa Rosa.
Right. I mean, that seems to be one of the unifying sort of principles that your campaign is predicated on. The idea that there once upon a time was a way that you could make yourself something.
Yes.
Right? And those who were not able to make themselves something may, once upon a time, have had an expectation that society would catch them, and it hasn't. So you're in this position where you want to help people help themselves, it sounds like. Help people make their own lives.
Yeah, and you know, I come back to my family, because you learn a lot from your family growing up. My grandma was the first female executive in the grocer industry in California.
Wow.
She started as a bad girl who, on her first day at work, her boss told her that he thought a woman's place was in the kitchen with enough rope to get to the bedroom.
Oh my
and
God.
She works her way up, is incredibly successful, one of the smartest women I have ever met. And then you have my mom, raised by strong women, as you can see a theme, who wanted to go a little bit of a different route and wanted to help our community's most vulnerable. For me, they're not inconclusive. And she was always the one who told me that the reason you help the vulnerable, help the homeless, is because you're lucky enough to not be in the same position as them. And that if you were, you would want the same help. That's not incompatible with somebody who wants to start a small business or has a good idea, who really wants to do it, but doesn't have the tools to get there. We as government, as the city, can continue to give people those tools, or at least help them to figure out where they can get those tools from so that everybody has access to it.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about getting indoors, it's about getting in business. It's facilitating the ambition and desires of those in our community.
Yeah, it's about talking about what do we want to see in our local community? What do we want Santa Rosa to look like? And if you ask me, I would love to see a bunch of young entrepreneurs who can afford to live here and can start businesses here, really reshaping the way that Santa Rosa looks. I'd love to see that. I
mean, the fear is that entrepreneur, leads to gentrification. Right? There's a misperception, I think, that startup culture is, Google lands here and then all the rents go up. But you're saying you want to start it here. So it's people who are here who want to make Google.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Or whatever they want to make. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's interesting, and yet I can't help but coming back to the service principle. Is it fulfilling to you?
There are really frustrating days.
Yeah. You're human, right? You can't just be give all the time.
Right. There are really frustrating days. I will tell you, part of why I decided to make the leap to run was getting really fed up with watching good ideas and good policy die at the hand of bad politics. Sometimes for really petty reasons. And that frustration builds and builds and builds, and then you get a small victory, and you see the difference that you make in somebody's life. Doesn't matter how minimal it is for the whole community, but for that person it could mean the world,
right.
And it keeps you going, and it makes you see the actual capacity of what this community can be.
So small battles will win the war.
Yes.
Small victories.
Yep. I'm going to give you an example.
Yeah.
So I helped represent Lake County for a number of years. Lake County is the poorest county in the state, highest rate of teen meth use, highest teen suicide rate. We had a small community called Lucerne. Lucerne has 1,200 individuals, and they had a new water treatment plant come in, $3 million, spread onto the public. Almost overnight, water rates jumped to $600 per billing cycle.
Really?
Yeah. We had seniors were standing in their showers with buckets, saving that water to boil it to cook with later. It was just things you would expect to see in a third world country.
Right.
So we did legislation to try to give them a low-income water rates assistance program. Water is the only utility in the state that doesn't have a low-income assistance program. And the bill died because of political reasons over in Sacramento. So meanwhile, our community is still calling us, crying, still collecting the water, and this is still going on today, by the way, and we couldn't get legislation through because of petty politics.
Well,
it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I'm not saying our city council has a petty politics issue, but you do have to work with other personalities and stuff like that. And how are you going to prevent yourself from inadvertently becoming one of those guys?
Right.
You know?
You really have to take a long view on the city. I think that it's really easy, particularly when first starting out, to burn bridges for temporary victories that then you can't rebuild in time to work on other issues.
Right.
I started off working on tax policy in the Capitol, which had a 2/3 vote. You had to work with Republican offices and Democratic offices to get there. You never know when you're going to actually be able to work with the other side. We end up working on an earned income tax credit match, helping particularly, demographically speaking, single moms who are working full-time, helping to bring them above the poverty line. Republicans loved it because to get the tax credit, you had to work full-time.
Right.
So it sort of meant both sides. You have to have an understanding of where people are coming from. You have to understand, if you're not with them, how you can get to a common ground. And one of the things that I did as staff for elected officials was find ways that I could work with each of the different city council members to build that relationship to be able to fall back on. I joined the Violence Prevention Partnership particularly because two of the council members wanted to sit down and talk about it.
Right.
They are passionate about it. They do really good work with it. And so I wanted to, even though it wasn't the first thing on my radar, being on the community advisory board, I wanted to be able to assist them in achieving what they wanted to achieve and develop that long-term relationship so that they know they could come to me if they ever needed something. And even if we were going to disagree, it wasn't the end of the world. We'd still work together on other issues.
What is your dream for Santa Rosa?
It's a really good question. I really want Santa Rosa to be a place where we are investing in public transit and nearby housing that is affordable for everyone. If you are young in Santa Rosa, it's really difficult to make it right now. I will tell you, I struggle to live in the community. High rent, high cost of living. If you have student loan debt, you feel like you are being weighted down a little bit, trying to save to buy a home.
And we're going to have a brain drain if we don't.
If we're going to have a brain drain.
Yeah.
My campaign theme is working to build a more livable Santa Rosa. And for each person, that's going to be different. For some people, that's going to mean being able to live in the community. For some people, it's going to mean having a park near so that their kids can play. Everybody's vision is going to be different, and I want everybody's voice to be heard in that process to be able to shape Santa Rosa to what they want it to be.
You heard it here. Chris Rogers running for City Council in Santa Rosa. This has been 7 to 7. Thank you, sir. I hope you come back.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.